Well, hey there, guys. Greetings and salutations, and welcome to this installment of Open Mic, the show where the mic is open. The floor is yours. What do you guys want to talk about? That is what we are here to discuss today. We're going to talk about anything you want to talk about. My name is, of course, John Campea. Good to have you guys here joining me this evening. And again, on Open Mic, unlike the John Campea Show. Now, the John Campea Show in the earlier part of the day, we take questions via the tip link, but here on Open Mic, we use the super chat feature that's in the live chat. That means to send in a question, you got to be watching live. But if you are watching live and you have a thought, theory, question, topic you'd like to address, as long as I deem it appropriate to address on the show, go ahead and use the super chat feature and fire it on in. And good to see everybody here who's in the live chat already. Good to have you guys joining me here tonight. And I thought, as I do every Open Mic, I usually start with the topic, and I thought I'd go back on tonight's kind of opening topic. I thought I'd go back to a discussion that we had on the John Campea Show earlier today. Now, earlier today, we talked about the rumor mill going around that maybe the Russo brothers might be doing X-Men. I don't believe the rumor myself, and I explained why I don't believe it, but I would love it if it did happen. But it was within that conversation that kind of a sub-conversation came up, and I wanted to revisit it. And that sub-conversation was revolving around when they do get around to doing X-Men, how should they do it? Should they, as Rob articulated earlier, should they do it kind of in the same way that they did the Avengers, which is to start with individual solo movies that then build up and accumulate with an X-Men movie. So, for example, an Iceman movie, a Morph movie, a Kitty Pryde movie, a Wolverine movie, a Cyclops movie, and then X-Men. They come together and form the X-Men. Or should they do it the way that I kind of envisioned, the way that George Miller was going to do his Justice League movie? Remember, when George Miller was going to do a Justice League movie, his idea was to start with Justice League and then do standalone films. So kind of the opposite of the way that Marvel approached it. And again, formula doesn't really matter. All that really matters is good movies, right? That's all that matters, is good movies. I mean, you do it the way Marvel did it, it clearly worked. If George Miller had done it his way, that probably could have worked too. It's all about making good movies. But what would be the best way to do it in approaching the X-Men? So there is the argument. Let's look at it from the point of view. And just to let you guys know in advance, my kind of belief is they should start with an X-Men movie, like not start with individual solo projects. But let's look at it from that point of view first. I think if you wanted to do that, there is precedent. Again, like Rob pointed out, it worked really well for Avengers, right? Start with an Iron Man movie, do a Captain America First Avengers movie, you do a Thor movie, I think then Iron Man 2. I can't remember which came first. Anyway, then, of course, you had Avengers. And then you did more standalone solo movies and then another Avengers movie, right? So there's clearly precedent for this, that it can work. And if you're Marvel, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? So take that approach. I, however, don't agree with that, and maybe you do. But I don't agree with that approach for X-Men. Now, Rob accurately pointed out today that, they started with Iron Man, who wasn't a very popular character at the time. See, everybody forgets that today. Like, everybody thinks of Iron Man as being one of the pillars of the MCU, and he is. But a lot of people forget that before the first Iron Man movie came out, as Scott Mantz put it in my documentary, Movie Trailers: A Love Story, at that point, Iron Man was a B-level character, like kind of at best. It was the movie and Robert Downey Jr.'s portrayal of him that really shot Iron Man into being a primary thing. So when I would say, like, what are you going to do with launching X-Men? Are you going to start with an Iceman movie? You think that's the way to launch the X-Men in the MCU? Are you going to do a Kitty Pryde movie? Are you going to do a Cyclops movie? Like, I just don't know that these characters carry enough public awareness and weight to launch a new branch of the cinematic universe. To which Rob replied, properly so, well, the same thing could be said of Marvel when they launched with Iron Man. But here would be my counter to that, is that everybody's got to remember when Marvel was starting the MCU, this is what I would say at any rate, and I'm open to other arguments. I could have my mind changed. But when Marvel was starting the MCU, who did they have? They didn't have Spider-Man. Spider-Man belonged to Sony. So you couldn't launch your MCU with a Spider-Man character. I mean, really, that would have been the ideal character to launch your cinematic universe with, right? Because by far, Spider-Man is the most popular MCU character or Marvel character. Like, it's not even close. It's not a question. Spider-Man is the most popular character they had at the time. But they couldn't launch an MCU with Spider-Man because they didn't have Spider-Man. Okay, well, one of the biggest, most popular characters in all of Marvel Comics is Wolverine. Launch with the Wolverine movie. You see, but you can't because you don't have Wolverine. You had Fox. Fox had Wolverine. You couldn't launch with X-Men because X-Men, again, was owned by Fox. They were very limited. Who did they have access to? And the reality is when Marvel was starting out their cinematic universe, they didn't exactly have their A bench there, right? Not Spider-Man, not Wolverine, that sort of thing. So you had your choice. You had Captain America, you had Thor, and you had Iron Man. You couldn't do a standalone Hulk movie anymore at that time, even though they did take a crack at a standalone Hulk movie. So they launched with what was their best option. And their best option was launching with Iron Man. There was no cinematic universe yet. You had to start somewhere. And I guess to them, it kind of felt like trying to come out of the gate with an entire Avengers movie probably was going to work for them. Maybe it would have, maybe it wouldn't have, whatever. But Iron Man was pretty much tied with your best choice of starting off with. It's either Iron Man, Captain America, or Thor. Those are your best options. So they let out with Iron Man, and the rest is history. Can you do that, or should you follow that same pattern now with X-Men? Well, the environment's a little different, right, than it was when they launched the MCU. When they launched the MCU, they didn't have a cinematic universe yet. They have a cinematic universe already. And I don't know if right now, like the only character I could see them leading off with, the only one I think they could literally come out of the gate with is Wolverine. I mean, that Wolverine is a solo standalone movie you could come right out of the gate with and have big public awareness of the character, and you could possibly have a successful hit movie on your hands. I just don't know that you could do that with a Hank McCoy movie. I don't know if you could do that like without having an X-Men movie first. I don't know that you could do that with Gambit. I don't know that you could do that with Iceman. As a matter of fact, there's only two characters that I think I'll say three. There are three possible characters you could lead off with solo movies before having an X-Men movie and have a reasonable hope of it being a hit. Wolverine, Storm, and Magneto. Although Magneto would be counterintuitive because he's supposed to be a villain and not an X-Man, granted. So really only two. I think the only two characters you could legitimately launch with and have any kind of hope of it being a hit. I mean, they could be good with any of the characters, but to be a hit, I really think it's only Wolverine or Storm. I think Storm you can get away. I don't even think you can get away with it with Gambit. I don't think you can get away with it with Jean Grey. I don't think you can get away with it with Cyclops. I don't think you can get away with it with Bishop or Emma Frost or anybody else. Not even a Charles Xavier. Even when they went and started to do the First Class era, it was First Class. They didn't just launch with a Professor X movie, the story of Charles. They literally launched into it with First Class, right? And in 2000, when they launched the X-Men franchise, they launched with an X-Men movie. So I just don't see a realistic way that you could launch X-Men with solo standalone movies. And besides, it's kind of also, I would also contend that it's kind of like Guardians of the Galaxy. People don't really look at Gamora, Quill, Drax, Groot, Rocket, Nebula, Mantis. Like, they don't really look at them as standalone solo characters, right? Like the general public who didn't know anything about Guardians of the Galaxy anyway, but really they're looked at as a team. And I think the brand X-Men, I think you launch characters. See, because what I think you could do is I think you could launch with an X-Men movie. And then once you establish characters in that X-Men movie, I think then you can investigate having spin-off standalone movies. Like maybe I don't think you can do I don't know, let's pull a character out. Let's say Bishop. I don't think you can do a Bishop movie right out of the gate. But you do an X-Men movie with Bishop in it, do him really well and get the audience to get on board that character. You could then maybe do a standalone solo movie with him afterwards, right? I just don't think that it would work that way. Not with X-Men, not with the MCU already in existence, right? Now, I could be wrong. Like maybe they come out of the gate and I mean, I don't know. You do a Jubilee movie. You start the X universe with a Jubilee, Fire in the Sky, the Jubilee story. I just made that up. I'm very proud of that. I'm going to copyright it. Don't steal it. Jubilee, Fire in the Sky. So maybe you could. Maybe you could launch a whole X universe with that and it makes $600 million. I mean, maybe that could be. I just think your smarter approach, your wiser choice is to come right out of the gate. I mean, you can have an X character pop up in some things. For example, Kevin Feige's already kind of very strongly implied that we're probably going to see some well-known X characters pop up in Secret Wars, right? And you can do that. But I think once you're launching your X movies properly, not triple X movies, that's different. We can talk about how to launch those properly later. But we'll do that on John Campea After Dark sometime. But if you want to launch your X-Men movies, I think you got to come out of the gate with an X-Men movie and then go from there. And again, I could be right. I could be wrong. I am curious to know what you guys think about that. Like, are you on the side of this that you honestly think that the general movie-going audience would absolutely embrace and get on board with some solo standalone films before doing an X-Men movie? Or do you think, like I do, that your best bet is to lead with your strongest foot forward, come right out of the gate with an X-Men movie? I don't know. It's a good question. I'm sure there's many different points of views, whatever you guys think. Jump on down to the comment section below and let me know your thoughts. All right, guys. With that down, we are going to do now the main idea, the whole reason we're here right now, which is to take your live comments and questions, shall we? Once again, if you have a thought, comment, question, topic you'd like me to address, as long as I deem it appropriate to address on the show, otherwise I won't address it, go ahead and use the super chat feature and send that in. So let's get into it right now, shall we? We're going to start off here with Mighty Tank 1. And Mighty Tank 1 writes, remember how you always say you're not kind of pregnant? Yeah, you're either pregnant or you're not pregnant. You're not kind of pregnant. Either you are or you're not. Well, looks like Netflix took that idea and made it into a movie with Amy Schumer. It doesn't look terrible, honestly. So I know what you're talking about. So I don't know if you guys saw it. There's a new Amy Schumer movie coming out. I'll give you all a second to ask why. There's a new Amy Schumer movie coming out on Netflix, and I can't remember the name of it. It might be called Kinda Pregnant, Sorta Pregnant, whatever, where basically she goes around pretending that she's pregnant. I saw the trailer, whatever. I thought the trailer, I didn't think there was anything special about the trailer. I will admit, near the end of the trailer, it got a little funny. I admit, near the end of the trailer started to get a little bit funny. But overall, the trailer didn't sell me on, and I'm not planning on watching it. By the way, let me just say this about Amy Schumer. I used to actually quite enjoy her. What was the name? The one, Trainwreck? Help me out in the live chat, guys. Was that the actual name of the movie that she did, that she had John Cena in it with her? Trainwreck? Anyway, I think it was called Trainwreck. Josh is saying, yes, it was Trainwreck. Thank you, Josh. So, yeah, it was Trainwreck. I'm not going to lie to you. I don't care what anybody thinks of her today and now. That was a damn funny movie. Trainwreck was really good. Now, I didn't follow Amy Schumer's comedy career or that much before Trainwreck. Like, I had heard of her, but Trainwreck was the first real thing that I engaged with her on. And like, it's a funny movie. And I thought, you know what? She could be something. And she's done a few little things where I thought she was all right. And then she did that one movie. I think, anybody remember this one? Remember she did that movie with Goldie Hawn? And I think they were mother and daughter and off on this trip. What was the name? And they were on the run. What was the name of that movie? Anybody in the live chat remember? I mean, gold star to you if you guys remember the name of that movie. But like, that was terrible. That movie was just awful. And like, I haven't really seen Amy Schumer in anything that I've really liked since. And yes, Luis is saying she was originally supposed to be Barbie. Yes, but it was going to be a different Barbie movie. They did have a really interesting... Oh, thank you, Patrick. Patrick knew the name of the movie. It was Snatched. Not Snatch. Snatched. Snatch is a great movie. But yes, there was... Before Greta Gerwig and crew did their smash hit Barbie movie, there were actually 2 iterations of Barbie before the Margot Robbie one got rolling. The first one was, I believe, was going to be an Anne Hathaway movie. And that one sounded kind of interesting. Anne Hathaway has a bad rep today, and I honestly don't know the fuck why. Anne Hathaway is awesome. She's a fantastic actress. I think she's wonderful, but whatever. So there was this Anne Hathaway version of Barbie first. Then that kind of went away. And then they kind of embraced this other idea for a Barbie movie with Amy Schumer. That I thought was interesting. Like it turns the whole concept of Barbie on its ear if you're getting Amy Schumer to be Barbie. I thought that had potential. But again, that got stuck in development hell and never turned into anything. So then they moved on from that. And then ultimately we got the Margot Robbie, Ryan Gosling version, which is great. The movie's fantastic. Became the #1 box office film of the year that year. So good for it. But anyway, on to this kind of pregnant movie. I am not going to probably spend any time watching it. Just being honest with you, Mighty Tank, probably not going to watch it myself. Although I will admit the trailer had its moments, but overall it didn't really sell me on it. All right. Next up, we have Orange Hand, who says, we need to admit that if the whole sequel trilogy was great, we wouldn't care if it had a plan. Oh, Orange Hand, you're missing the point. Anyway, let's continue with the question. We need to admit that if the whole sequel trilogy was great, we wouldn't care if it had a plan. BSG, Battlestar Galactica, didn't have a plan. Oh, it absolutely had a plan. 1000% it had a plan. You're comparing apples to spaceships. But let me say, didn't have a plan, and it's your favorite show. Yes, it is my favorite show. But you're missing a huge... Okay, let's go back to the first part where you say, we need to admit that if the whole sequel was great, we wouldn't care that it didn't have a plan. Okay. Yes, but that's results bias. Let me use the same illustration I use a lot, right? If you're playing basketball, you don't have to know basketball very well to understand that the closer you are to the basket when you shoot it, the higher the probability of success, right? You know that, even if you know nothing about basketball. You know that if you take the closer you are to the basket when you take your shot, the higher the percentage chance of success is. Therefore, If there's plenty of time on the clock and you're just starting to come down the court and you're not even at half court yet and you decide to heave up a shot, oh, maybe it goes in. But the point is you're doing something that greatly reduces the possibility of success. And while it's possible that they could have approached the sequel trilogy with no plan, and they did, they approached it with no plan, there is a possibility that they could have maybe ended up with 3 successful movies. The fact of the matter is, by approaching it that way, they started off with a greatly reduced possibility of success. They drastically lowered their chances to succeed by approaching a new Star Wars trilogy with no plan. I mean, yeah, he drank the Kool-Aid with a bottle of rat poison in it, but if he had survived, we wouldn't have freaked out as much. Okay, sure. If he had survived drinking the Kool-Aid with a bottle of rat poison in it, we wouldn't have freaked out as much because he wouldn't be dead. But it doesn't change the possibility or the fact that you shouldn't be drinking a glass of Kool-Aid with a bottle of rat poison in it. And that's what Star Wars did. They started off, they did a movie trilogy by drinking a bottle of rat poison and said, I don't know, maybe it'll work out anyway. Right? The very fact that they led out, starting by reducing their chances of having success by having no plan. I mean, yeah, so fine. Yeah. Well, a guy takes out all the money, he sells his house to buy lottery tickets, and now he's broke and homeless. Well, yeah, but if he had won the lottery, we wouldn't have been saying it was a bad idea. It was a bad idea. It was a bad idea. Now, your comparison to Battlestar Galactica is completely wrong. You see, Battlestar Galactica isn't 3 2-hour movies. Television shows, there's a good documentary called Showrunners that really goes into the whole mythos of the people who have their controlling hand of running shows and planning shows. And in that documentary, there's this big successful television guy in Hollywood who was the showrunner of that show called Bones. I never watched Bones, but I'm very familiar. It had David Boreanaz in it. Anyway, so the showrunner of Bones, he said, you can't plan more than like 2 seasons. You just can't. He said, because you have to produce the shows and really see them come to life and then put them out on the air and see how it gets responded to. You have to, if you try to plan too far ahead with a TV show, you're going to get lost. You have to only plan 1 season or maybe a little bit ahead of 1 season at a time. There are a very few handful of shows that have like planned all 5 seasons at once, but those are very rare. That's very, very rare. Like the most experienced showrunners will say, you've got to plan to a degree, but then you have to let it kind of breathe, take a life of its own, and then decide where it's best to go. But in the case of something like Battlestar Galactica, they got full seasons into it. The 3 Star Wars movies is about 6 hours. 1 season of Battlestar Galactica had double that. So they would completely plan out their entire seasons. And then as the shows were coming together and as they saw the characters, some characters working better, some chemistries working better, then they would adjust and pivot and then go accordingly into the next season. But trying to compare a movie to an entire season of television is, again, that's not even comparing apples to oranges. That's comparing apples to spaceships. It's completely different. So, yes, if the Star Wars trilogy had all worked out to be utterly fantastic, we wouldn't be talking about the reason for their failure was because they didn't plan. But the reality is they had a very small chance of success by having no plan. It was very unlikely right from the beginning that the trilogy was going to work without a plan. Even George Lucas, who did pivot here and there, he had a basic idea of where things were going. I mean, he didn't know that Luke was going to end up being Leia's brother until like just before they did Empire, but still he had the basic idea of where everything was going, what they were doing. He didn't write out all 3 scripts, and nor do I think Kathleen Kennedy needed to have 3 complete scripts before even shooting movie 1. Not at all. I think the same thing applies as from the television. You got to do the first movie and then kind of see where you need to, but they should have at least had the bones of what it would have been, and they had no idea where they were going. No idea where they were going. And that's why each of the movies got progressively worse. I still think The Force Awakens was a good movie. I enjoy The Force Awakens. I don't care what anybody else says. But then The Last Jedi was less good, and then The Rise of Skywalker was complete rubbish. And a big part of that was because they had no plan. So, yeah, you can play Russian roulette. You can put a bullet in the chamber, spin the thing, pull the trigger, say, oh, well, you wouldn't have said it was a bad idea if the gun didn't go off. It was still a very bad idea. Whether or not the bullet went off, it was still a bad idea. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, that's how I would respond to that question, Orange Hand. Anyway. All right, but thanks for sending it in, man. I do appreciate it. All right, next up, we got Dan Irwin who writes, hey, John, like you, I'm a huge fan of Shogun. I was very surprised, however, that Cosmo Jarvis didn't receive any awards buzz. I thought he was great. He was great. Cosmo Jarvis was great. I'm telling you, man, I was very young, but I still remember the Richard Chamberlain miniseries version of Shogun. It's like, how are you going to get somebody to replace Richard Chamberlain? And Cosmo Jarvis did great. But it's kind of the Paul Dano syndrome, right? He was just going to get overshadowed. He was just going to get overshadowed. I mean, while he was wonderful, I'm going to pull up a stat here. While he was absolutely wonderful in that, and I mean, his voice was amazing, right? I think I could just listen to this guy talk. Like his John Blackthorne voice, like it was just, I could just hear him talk his lines all the time. Like he just carried so much, and he was strong when he needed to be strong. He could deliver emotion when he needed to deliver emotion. It was incredible. But it was the Paul Dano syndrome. You guys have heard me mention this before. Paul Dano was in a little movie called There Will Be Blood. And he was spectacular. Spectacular. Oscar worthy, I would even say. The problem was, he also happened to be in that movie with the greatest actor of all time, Daniel Day-Lewis, who gave the best performance of his career. I would argue, and it's all subjective, but in my opinion, Daniel Day-Lewis's performance in There Will Be Blood is the single greatest male lead performance in movie history. I don't think it's the greatest movie in movie history, but I think it's the greatest single male lead performance in film history. And so as good as Paul Dano was, all anybody talked about was Daniel Day-Lewis. Understandably so. And he got totally lost in the shadow. And the problem for Cosmo Jarvis wasn't that he wasn't fantastic. He was. But he happened to be in the show with 2 other performances, Anna Sawai and Hiroyuki Sanada. And like, the thing is, they're going to get most of the attention. And sure enough, they did. They went on and won all the awards. Hiroyuki Sanada won all the awards. Anna Sawai won all the awards. And you kind of just had Cosmo Jarvis, who unfairly kind of got lost in the shadow of it all. And so it was tough, man. It was really tough. But yes, Cosmo was fantastic. The show is one of the best TV shows I've ever watched. And he deserved more credit than he got. And maybe if they get around to doing season 2, which they say they're going to do, he can stand out a little bit more this time because Anna Sawai won't be there. But it was a tough one for him, Dan. It was a real tough one for him. All right. Next up, Dan Irwin also wrote, also, what are your thoughts on Ratatouille? Who doesn't love Ratatouille? Ratatouille is brilliant and wonderful and charming and warm, and I absolutely love it. Absolutely love it. All right. Thanks for that, Dan. Next up, we've got Mike's Movie Madness, who writes, "Hey, John, my friend and I are going to start our podcast up again. We both work full-time jobs, and this will just be for fun. What level of consistency should we aim for? Weekly, monthly, doesn't matter?" Well, I think consistency matters. But what is your consistency? Daily, weekly, monthly, hourly? But whatever you choose, try to be consistent with it. It partially depends on what is your subject matter, right? So there are a lot of things you could just do a weekly podcast with, and that's fine. Some things, like I know, we tried to get Filthy Sports going, and we adjusted it to a weekly thing, but so much stuff happens in sports every single day that we just weren't talking about a lot of the big sports stuff. And it made it tricky. So it also depends on what your subject matter is. I would say if you're doing it for fun, weekly. I think weekly is probably the best way to go. I might give you a different answer depending on what your subject matter is and your schedule, but I would say weekly. Weekly is a pretty good way to start, I would think. And then just try to make sure you stay consistent, because it's a lot easier to increase the amount of podcasts you do than decrease it. So start weekly and then see how things go from there. And best of luck to you, Mike Movie Madness. All right, next up. Jerome writes, "Did Yellowstone ever come off as preachy to you?" Oh, Jerome. So those of you who know, Jerome has been writing, I don't know why. Jerome seems to be obsessed with the fact, and you are, Jerome, seems to be obsessed with the fact that I mentioned that I find Landman kind of preachy. He's written in like 3 or 4 questions about things being preachy. So now Jerome has asked me if I ever found Yellowstone preachy. Yes. I've said as much before. And I love Yellowstone. I love that show. But it does get a little preachy at times. Like there are a couple of times in a couple of scenes, especially, I remember this one scene in particular, a couple of them, with when John Dutton, played by Kevin Costner, and the young environmentalist that he kind of becomes involved with, Piper Perabo, remember that? And every once in a while, he would give these, speeches about, this is why I'm right. Like, you guys think this, but this is why I'm right. This is why we're right to do ranching the way we do them. And this is why we're right to do this and all that kind of stuff. And it really does feel like the showrunner is just getting into a pulpit and talking at you and saying, if you don't believe this, you're so wrong. And that's what I kind of define as a bit preachy. And the thing is, Landman, which I also really enjoy Landman. I think the show's really good. I watched that thing all the way through. The whole Andy Garcia popping up at the end was really kind of cool. But the one knock I have on Landman is that it is pretty preachy. It feels like every single episode we have to get Tommy, our main character, giving some kind of sermon about the reason his character's worldview is the only worldview to have. And he's always talking down to people and putting people in their place, right? And it gets thick. I don't mind it so much like in Yellowstone, where 90% of the time it's kind of illustrated. It's never a character standing up and talking down to somebody and saying, this is the way things are. So I do think even Yellowstone, which is one of my favorite things on TV, Yellowstone had a tendency once in a while to get kind of preachy too. Not as bad as Landman, but it had that tendency as well. All right. Next up, Johnny Weiner writes, Part 1, I can't believe Anthony Mackie had to apologize for early about what Captain America represents. Yeah, I mean, that whole thing was stupid. It was like anybody who pretended to be upset by Anthony Mackie's comments were just virtue signaling. They were playing semantics to come out with fake outrage, pretend like they were all outraged just so they could pretend to be fake outraged. Everybody knew what Anthony Mackie was saying. Everybody knew exactly what he meant. He was saying that I don't think the term America is something Captain America represents. Captain America represents qualities, and they were qualities that America should aspire to. That's what Captain America is. He's a symbol of what America should look to and aspire to. That's what he is. And everybody, listen to this, everybody absolutely understood exactly what he meant. They just pretended they didn't. They pretended to be outraged. They played semantics and pretended like they thought he was saying something else. No, because while they may be insincere, they're not stupid. They knew exactly what Anthony Mackie said. They knew exactly how he said it. They knew exactly why he said what he said, and they knew exactly what he meant by it. They just wanted to pretend not to so they could do their fake outrage and do their virtue signaling. And it was, quite frankly, it was sad and pathetic. It was sad and pathetic. It really was. All these people who faking this outrage over what he said when they clearly understood what he was saying, totally pathetic. Just kind of drives the fact home that they're very weak, very, very weak and fragile and sensitive and all that kind of stuff. But whatever. Whatever. Anyway, let's go on. Next up. Let's see. Dallas Designer writes, I don't care what they do. I want the Daniels to direct something in the MCU. Also, wouldn't mind Coogler going beyond the Black Panther franchise. I mean, the Daniels, especially after seeing what they did on Skeleton Crew. Of course, the Daniels are the guys who directed Everything Everywhere All at Once. Spectacular. So, of course, right? If you have a franchise that you love, like the MCU, you would love to see some of the most talented storytellers out there come into your world and tell a story there. Absolutely. I would love to see Steven Spielberg do an MCU movie. I would love to see Steven Spielberg do a Star Wars movie. I would love to see Steven Spielberg do a DC movie. I would love to see Steven Spielberg do a Harry Potter movie. I'd love to see Steven Spielberg do a James Bond movie. Yeah, of course. So yeah, I'm right there with you. And I agree with you. I would be very curious to see Ryan Coogler direct something in the MCU that isn't Black Panther. I'm not saying he should abandon the Black Panther franchise. I'm just saying I would also like to see him tackle other storytelling within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I think that would be cool. Man, though, how good does Sinners look? How good does Sinners look? I cannot wait to watch that, man. I'm very stoked about that. Let's see. Tyler Frost writes, the question for the Labyrinth sequel is who will play Bowie's package. Mighty Tank 1 writes, whatever happened to John Krasinski's SGN? I know he sold the rights, but I guess they never moved forward with it. I hope he directs for Marvel or DC in the future. I'll be honest with you, Mighty Tank 1, I have no idea what you're talking about. Anybody in the live chat knows what he's talking about when he says John Krasinski's SGN? Yeah, I honestly have no idea. Anybody in the live chat? Oh, some good news. Guys, please don't write in acronyms. Please. I just wasted 2 minutes of airtime trying to figure out an acronym. Do not write in an acronym. Okay. Some good news. Yeah, that was something that John Krasinski came up with while the pandemic was going on, and it was such a great idea. He sold it. He sold it not long after he started it. And this other group picked it up and they were going to carry it on. But I don't think they succeeded because I don't think anybody ever talked about it again after that. Yeah, so I honestly don't know what happened to that. So it just kind of went on and but yeah, it was just very shortly after he got started. I think he got 4 or 5 or 6 episodes into it. And then I think the pandemic was starting to come to an end. And then he kind of, instead of just shutting it down, he decided to sell it off and let somebody else carry it on. But I don't remember anybody doing anything of note with it after that. It was such a great idea, though, especially at the time. We really needed it. All right. Next, we go to Kevin Frazier, who writes, I'd rather get to know the X-Men on an individual basis and then have a team up. Either way, I just want a good story. But here's the problem I would propose, Kevin. Who's going to go see a Kitty Pryde movie? Who's going to go see an Iceman movie? Who's going to go see anybody other than Wolverine? Who's going to go see that? I don't know that the wider movie-going audiences, like the 5% of us, the tiny little community that we are, the 5% of us that kind of are inside baseball like you and I, yeah, we'll go see it, but it's not going to be successful. It's just not. And normally we got to know most of the X-Men characters. This is a truism. Go to the comic books, right? We got to know the individuals in the X-Men titles through the X-Men. It was through X-Men that we got to know them individually. Right? Stan Lee didn't start off with the Jean Grey comic and then did a Hank McCoy comic and then did a Bobby comic and then do an Angel comic. And then, no, he came out with X-Men. And then through the lens of X-Men, we started to get to know more individual characters. But even in the comics, we got to know the characters through the X-Men, not before the X-Men. And so I just think it would be a very, very tough sell to the 95% of the movie-going audience to come out of the gate and do an Angel movie, right? I just think that's a very hard sell. I think it would work better. And I could be wrong. I could be totally wrong. I'm just saying right now, I just kind of feel like you would have much more success getting the audience to know Angel through an X-Men movie than by trying to launch an Angel movie. That's just kind of my, and again, I could be totally wrong about that, but that's just kind of the way I see it right now. All right. Thanks for that, Kevin. Next up, we got Jerome who writes in. Do you know, you do know that even if T'Challa gets recasted, it's most likely Shuri still gets to keep the powers because the original plan for Black Panther 3 was for her to take the herb and both of them being Black Panther. I don't see, I've read those reports. I don't believe that. And by the way, story-wise, so I don't buy that for a second. But even if it was true, which I don't believe it is, but even if it was true, story-wise, that would make more sense. Like Shuri just deciding to take the herb when that option is available when you already have a Black Panther. The notion in the movie that you had a choice of who should be the warrior defender of Wakanda. Should it be Nakia, a trained international warrior, the betrothed of King T'Challa, who in that movie herself fought her way into Talocan to save Shuri and fought her way out without the herb? Would she be the best choice? By the way, who the Queen Mother in Black Panther 1 actually said, you should take the herb to Nakia. So is she the best choice? Maybe M'Baku, the great ape. The guy who came that close to beating T'Challa in straight up hand-to-hand combat. The guy who ruled his own section of Wakanda, a fearsome warrior. Is he a good choice to maybe be Black Panther? No, wait. I got an idea. The little science girl. Yeah. What? She doesn't even know how to throw a punch. Nah. She should be the warrior defender of Wakanda. Why? It was the dumbest idea in the world. Now, again, if you had a movie where T'Challa was still there and he was Black Panther, and Shuri just decided, I'm going to take the herb. Like, there's not a decision that was made to make Shuri the new warrior defender. Maybe, something happened and she wasn't able to help her brother and she felt powerless and weak and she decided to take the herb. I can live with that story-wise. Story-wise, that makes sense. But when the way the Black Panther 2 was set up and a choice had to be made, we need a Black Panther. We need a warrior. We're going to have a king. They eventually made M'Baku king. But Wakanda needs both. They need a king and they need a warrior defender Black Panther. And right there in the room, you had Nakia. Any one of the Dora Milaje. Any one of the Dora Milaje. But no, they gave it to the skinny little science girl. Made no sense. Made absolutely zero sense. So, yeah. But again, if she had done it because she felt guilty and she wanted to be able to help her brother next time because she felt weak and powerless and that's why she decided to take it, I could have lived with that. But the way they did in Black Panther 2, I thought was a massive mistake. Okay. Next up. It's Reed Davis writes, I want Wonder Woman to be taller than Batman and Superman in the DCU. Completely not important. Completely irrelevant. Doesn't matter. I mean, in an ideal world, sure, she's an Amazonian. Is it important to the movie? Will it make the movie any 1 ounce better or worse? Does it change anything about our understanding of the Wonder Woman character? Probably not. But yeah, you listen, if James Gunn came to me, which you all should be thankful that he doesn't, but if James Gunn were to come to me and say, hey, John, we've got these 2 candidates for Wonder Woman. They're both equally talented. They've kind of got the same look. They both have done theater. They're both tremendously talented. They're great. They've both screen tested well, and they're totally equal, but one is 4 inches taller than the other. I'd say, well, if they're totally equal in every other way, take the girl who's 4 inches taller because she's Amazonian. But if the other girl who was a few inches shorter was like 3% better, I would say go with her. I think ultimately that would serve the universe better. But yeah, all other things being equal, yeah, go for the taller one if all other things are equal. All right. Next up, we got Kevin Fraser who writes, maybe introduce X-Men via buddy cop formula. Worked well for Deadpool and Wolverine, except no, it didn't. It did not. Let's get to that in a second. Or maybe operate different tiers. More prominent heroes get their own movie while B and C level mutants pair up. Okay, so here's the problem with your Deadpool and Wolverine thing. Both of them were already introduced. Deadpool, we already knew Deadpool. Wolverine, we already knew Wolverine. They didn't introduce Deadpool and Wolverine in a buddy team-up movie. Not to mention they're 2 insanely popular characters. Right? Insanely popular characters. That's different than your suggestion of taking B and C level mutants and pair them up. Okay. Morph and Jubilee, the movie? Is anybody going to go see that? So you see what I'm saying, right, Kevin? It's that Deadpool, already met him. Everybody knows him. $1 billion franchise. Wolverine, everybody knows him. Everybody already met him. His movies have made billions. And they're 2 of the most popular characters out there. And then you put them there. That is a far cry and not really comparable to the idea of taking Morph and Jubilee and giving them a buddy team up movie. See what I'm saying? So I just don't think the analogy works in that way. But listen, that's not to say though, that I think you launch with an X-Men movie. And then once you do, and you've got the X-Men movie and the world has now met our new Hank McCoy and Bobby Iceman, and then having a, Fur and Ice. There you go. That's the name of my Beast and Iceman team up. Fur and Ice. And they can have a team up movie. I could see doing that after you've had an X-Men movie to introduce the world to them. But I mean, who knows? Maybe it could work. I don't know. Anyway, I like the fact that you're trying to think creatively about it, Kevin. I like that. All right. Hey guys, with that, we still have more questions to get to, but before we get to them, we're going to take a quick moment here and thank the sponsor of tonight's episode of Open Mic, our friends at Kikoff. Guys, we want to take a second to thank a sponsor of today's video, Kikoff. January always feels like recovery mode, doesn't it? I mean, after all the holiday fun and let's be honest, all the holiday spending, it can feel like a credit hangover. But don't worry, I've got the perfect solution to help you bounce back in 2025. Kikoff, the #1 credit building app in the App Store. Kikoff is a total game changer if you're looking to start building or improving your credit. Their plans? They start at just $5 a month. No credit check, no hidden fees, and no interest. Everybody's been there, guys. Trying to navigate credit can feel like a maze, but Kikoff makes it easy. You can sign up in minutes on your phone and be instantly set up with a credit line designed specifically for building credit, not for spending. And here's a fun fact. If your credit's under 600, you could jump around 28 points in your first month. It's that simple. Shake off the credit hangover and look forward to brighter credit with Kikoff. Get your first month for just $1 at getkikoff.com/Campea today. That's getkikoff, KIKOFF.com/Campea. Must sign up via kikoff.com/Campea to activate offer. Offer applies to new customers first month only. Subject to approval. Offer subject to change. Terms and conditions may apply. Points out based on Equifax VantageScore 3.0 changes for Kikoff users starting under 600 who made their first on-time payment between January 2021 and March 2024. Payment and credit activity outside of Kikoff can have an impact on your credit. Individual results may vary. And thank you to our friends at Kikoff for sponsoring tonight's episode of Open Mic. All right, guys, let's get back over to your questions here, shall we? We're going to pick up again with Kevin Fraser, who writes, I think more importantly, we need young actors for longevity's sake. 20-year timeline. Part of the reason I adore Iron Man, Thor, Cap is because I grew up in their good stories. Yeah, I mean, let's face it, 20 years is probably too much, right? Like, the kind of run that Hugh Jackman has had as Wolverine is the very, very rare exception, right? That's the rare exception. I don't think it's realistic to want to cast people with 20 years in mind. Maybe a good 8, 9, 10 years. So I don't think you need to get people in their 20s, depending on what your stories, what kind of stories you want to tell. But I don't think you necessarily have to get people in their 20s. What I do think, though, is that you can't start with a Scott Summers and an actor who's already 48 or 52 or something like that, right? There's nothing wrong with an actor being 48 or 52 or whatever, but not if you want them to run in that character for a good 10, 11, 12 years. I think 20 is a little unrealistic because, again, sure, there was Hugh Jackman, but that was 1 in 1,000, right? So, but thinking more along the lines of 10 years. So I think you can go into 30s, maybe even really early 40s, maybe a really young early 40s person, but you know, they'll probably want their team to be a bit younger. At least that's my guess. All right. Let's see. Trickster Nova writes, hey, John, when do you think we'll get the next update regarding 007? Also, please come to Australia. Hey, man, if any company in Australia wants to sponsor a John Campea live show in Perth or Sydney or whatever, I am all open to it. But someone's going to have to pay for it because I ain't paying for it. That's an expensive trip, my friend, but I would love to go. All right. As far as when do I think we're going to get our next update? I honestly have no idea. I have no idea because recently the story came out that Barbara Broccoli, the head of the Broccoli family that controls the James Bond IP, and Amazon MGM Studios, which controls the movie rights now to the James Bond character, absolutely hate each other. And they are not getting along. And they're not able to see eye to eye. I was honestly starting to think we should have had news by now. We should have had, a new James Bond movie should have maybe been in production by now. For like a new James Bond movie to come out in 2026 or something like that. But then that story came out that actually made sense. Like the Broccoli family and the studio absolutely hate each other. The quote in Variety was, I believe Barbara Broccoli's quote in Variety was, those guys are fucking assholes or something along those lines. Yeah. So listen, we could get news tomorrow, Trickster Nova. It could be years. It could be years before we get any more news on 007. So hopefully the two sides are going to be able to act like grown-ups and say, look, we don't have to like each other, but this is bad for business. None of us are making money as long as we're not making a new James Bond movie. Let's make money. Let's be mad at each other. Let's hate each other's guts. Let's not respect each other, but let's at least make money while we're doing it. So hopefully they can come up with something soon. All right. Next up, we got Edgar Navarro who writes, definitely start with X-Men and then branch off. Why not start with a Magneto movie? Are villains not a way to go in your opinion? Definitely villains aren't the way to go to start your cinematic universe. No, you start with your heroes. You start with your protagonists. I'm not saying you can't have a Magneto movie. You know, I think you can. I think X-Men First Class showed that you could do a Magneto movie. You absolutely can. Magneto, by the way, is a little bit of trivia for you. Magneto is my all-time favorite comic book character. So I definitely think you can do a Magneto movie, but I do not think you can launch your new branch of that cinematic universe. I don't think you launch the X-Men with Magneto. You launch with X-Men, right? And then you can build up to a Magneto movie, sure. But I don't think you can start off with a Magneto movie. That's something that I think, Edgar, at least in my opinion, would have to come a little bit later. Let's see. Artificially stupid intelligence writes, Gunn needs help. Gunn needs to help WB make better games. What does James Gunn know about making games, though? I mean, listen, I don't ever want to be guilty of underestimating James Gunn. I don't underestimate that. But what does James Gunn know about making video games? Yeah, man, that's suicide. I remember when they first debuted, I think it was at Comic-Con a few years ago, when they first debuted and announced and showed some footage of this new Suicide Squad video game, and everybody got all excited. And then we waited for what felt like years, and then the game came out. Now, I never played the game, but it did seem to, it seemed to really stink the place out. Everybody was unhappy with it. So it does seem like video games is a way they need to get going with it. All right. Next up, we've got Jerome, who sends in a $20 super chat. Thank you, Jerome, for supporting the channel on that level, man. And Jerome writes, in regards to why Shuri didn't give the herb to Nakia, besides wanting the power to kill Namor herself, is there was a possibility the herb could have killed her since it was synthetic, and as a scientist, she was being cautious. That's excuses to me. It's story, the fate of the country was at stake. Look, there's just no dancing around it, man. It was a bad story decision. It was a bad story decision that made no sense. And we can try to dance around it and come up with little nitpicky excuses as to why it happened. But at the end of the day, story-wise, it made absolutely no sense. When you had these amazing, viable options to become the next warrior protector of Wakanda, and instead you went with the little science girl who doesn't know how to throw a punch. It made no sense. No sense. Especially, again, when Nakia is in the room, who is 20 times a better choice to be the new Black Panther. Who, actually knowing what she's doing, she probably just would have been able to straight up beat Namor. Nakia had the powers of the Black Panther. She straight up could have just beat Namor. But yeah, so there's just no dancing around it, Jerome. It was just a bad story decision. And that's fine. Listen, I give Ryan Coogler a pass on Black Panther 2 because he was trying to make that movie under the most impossible circumstances, man. They had to throw out their plans. They had just lost their friend, the face of the franchise. And it's in that environment that they're trying to pull everybody back together and make a movie anyway. That the fact that they even got a movie made is Herculean, in my opinion. And so I don't hold Black Panther 2 against Ryan Coogler in any stretch of the imagination. I don't know that any director could have done a better job under the circumstances. As a matter of fact, maybe it would have been wise because Ryan Coogler was so closely connected to it and to, the situation and very emotionally connected to it. Maybe it would have been a good idea for them to have just gotten another director for it. I mean, again, but I don't hold anything against anybody for Black Panther. But that doesn't change the fact that was a bad story decision, man. It just really, really was. It made no sense internally. All right. Next up, Keaton Habeck writes, what makes a good studio exec? People like Bob Iger and David Zaslav. I think the things that make a good studio exec is the same thing that makes a good executive at all. And that is, I think the number one skill that an executive needs to have is the ability to identify talented people and then put those people in the best position to succeed. I think that is the absolute hallmark of a great executive. It doesn't matter if you're a cola company executive, a clothing manufacturing company executive, a car manufacturing executive, a movie studio executive, is to the first and foremost, the ability. I mean, you got to have a grand vision for the company. That's clear and obvious, but then the actual skill set needed, I think, are being able to identify extremely talented people, and then the ability to place those people in the best opportunity to succeed. I think that's the key to all of it. And yeah. And, take the Bob Chapek experiment, for example. The point where I and a lot of other people started to realize, oh no, this isn't going to go well. Because remember, I was all for the Bob Chapek hire when it first happened. On paper, it was a good hire. But what happened that started to make all of us realize that Bob Chapek was the wrong guy? He showed that he didn't have those two skills. He started taking away the authority of the creative people in the company. He started putting a banker in charge of the creative people. He created a new leadership structure within Disney that totally killed its creative flow. I mean, it was just a disaster. And that's when a lot of us started, like, I'm sure a lot of you and me, we are like, oh no, I still remember the day that new leadership structure, the restructuring of Disney's leadership came out. And we were all like, that's stupid. This is terrible. Like, and that's when we all kind of did in our best Dave Chappelle impersonations. Oh no, like this was not good. So I would say, yeah, those are the two most important skill sets. Identify super talented people and then putting them in the best positions to succeed. That's the most important job of any executive. Great question, Keaton. Appreciate that. All right. Let's see here. Next up, we've got Nicholas Oliver, who writes, do you think James Gunn would cast Henry Cavill as Jor-El, or would that be too cheesy? Oh man, that would be way too cheesy. Now listen, I am totally down for my boy Henry, who you can see right there. There's my boy Henry. Little nipple tickle. Ticky ticky. Anyway, my boy Henry Cavill, right? I am all for James Gunn casting Henry Cavill at some point in some role in the DCU. Absolutely I am. 100% I am. But to have him as Jor-El, no, that's a Saturday Night Live skit. That's just schlocky. I don't, that wouldn't, you know what that would be? That would just be so distracting and it would pull everybody out of the movie. I just don't think that would be a good idea. Like, have him as something later on. Sure. Yes. You don't have him in any way connected to Superman. Like, you can have him as a character who knows Superman. That's fine. But you don't have him. You don't make him Superman. You don't make him Ultraman. You don't make him Jor-El. You don't make him Zod. You don't make him any of these characters, right? You don't make, because that's just would come across as weird and totally be distracting from the movie itself. But as another character in DC, absolutely. Sure. Why not? All right. Next up, Luis Linos writes, hey, John, what's more likely that we'll see them coming back in the MCU? Hercules or Eros, Thanos' brother? Yeah. What's his name? What's the One Direction guy's name? Harry Styles. That was it. Woo. All right. First of all, you had, I keep forgetting the name of the actor, the guy who played Roy Kent in Ted Lasso and is currently in Shrinking. He's great in it, by the way. If any of you guys remember what his name is, the actor's name, I keep forgetting the actor's name, but he played Roy Kent. Anyway, he showed up at the end of Thor as Hercules. Okay. I loved that little end scene. Like, again, I have my problems with Thor Love and Thunder, but I love that little end scene. I loved the end scene. I really did. I thought the end scene was great. And I would have liked to have seen him play Hercules. Brett Goldstein. Thank you. Thank you, Keaton. It was Brett Goldstein. I would be, listen, it may not be the popular opinion. I would be totally down to see Brett Goldstein play Hercules in the MCU. I'd be totally down for it. Getting Harry Styles, I don't know. I'll be honest with you. I don't think we see either of them again. But I would say if I had to pick one that had the better chance, I actually think there's a better chance we see Harry Styles back. I don't think they're ever going to go back to the Hercules thing. I wish they would. I honestly wish they would. But I think the one they're going to do is probably Harry Styles. I think that's the one that they'll probably say they have some more upside to trying. So, we'll see what happens. All right. Let's see. Next up, we've got, I do not know why I can't get my screen to come on. Oh, I know why. It'll take me a second to fix it. I'll get to that in a second. Next up, Back Fandango X writes, you know how movie stars used to not do TV shows very often? Yep. It was considered beneath movie stars to do TV, but it's so common now. What changed? Yeah. So it used to be, I mean, it's changed a lot in the last 10 years, but it used to be that there were two levels. There were movie stars and then there were TV stars. And I mean, hell, you'd still love to be a TV star, right? But it was considered more desirable to be a movie star. By the way, guys, I've turned off the super chats. We've got more than enough to get through the show, and we've already gone over an hour tonight. So the super chats are turned off. Anyway, here was the general thinking at the time, and they weren't wrong. Because remember, this is more back in the network TV era, right? The notion that why would people pay money to go see you in a movie theater if they can already watch you every week for free on television? That was the general feeling. That you didn't want to suddenly be seen as a TV guy, because if you were, it would be hard to get people to come out to see your movies. And that's why for the longest time, you could count on your fingers over like a 20-year span. You could count on your fingers the number of TV stars who were able to successfully make the jump to becoming legitimate movie stars. It was a totally tiny number. Michael J. Fox was one of them. George Clooney was one of them. There were a couple, but there really weren't many. And it would very rarely happen. And what would happen is movie stars would resist going down to doing television out of the fear that they would then get looped into that. Right? I mean, somebody brought up Jennifer Aniston. Is Jennifer Aniston become a legitimate movie star? I don't know that she became she appeared in some movies, but did she ever actually become a legitimate movie star? As a matter of fact, look at the cast of Friends. Friends was like the number one TV show for nearly a decade, right? How many of them legitimately be able to become legitimate A-list movie stars? None. Someone's saying Will Smith. Will Smith doesn't count because Will Smith was already a music star before he was on television. He was already a big music star. So it didn't happen often, but then television started to become, you know, who was the first guy that I really noticed was a big movie star and now he's doing TV? Gary Sinise. Because Gary Sinise, who is Lieutenant Dan, he did one of those NCIS shows. I can't remember, one of the crime CSI shows. I can't remember which one it was, but I remember when he made that jump from movie star to TV star, that was one of the first times I went, wow, like that guy's a legit movie star. And he just came down to do this. That's kind of interesting. Charles is saying it was CSI New York. But then that all changed, like, especially with the advent of like prestige movie or prestige streaming, shows on streaming. Now it's completely looked at differently. It's a different world now. You get movie stars appearing in prestige streaming shows now all the time. It's still not easy for somebody to start. It's still not easy for somebody to start as a streaming star and then become a movie star, but it's a lot more common now to see movie stars come down and do a streaming show. So yeah, it really started to change about 10 years ago, like a lot. Good observation. All right. Next up, and I see if I can get this on now, and I can. Michael T writes, every time I see Harrison Ford in the Cap 4 trailers, I just see Paul from Shrinking. I'm kind of the same way. I admit that. In a uniform, "You're not Steve Rogers," is so something that he would say. Guys, I know I say it all the time, but I got to say it again. If you're not watching Shrinking, you're only robbing yourself. It's one of the best shows on television. It is so remarkably good. And Harrison Ford has not been this good in decades. Harrison Ford hasn't been this good in decades. So if you're not watching, you totally should. But yes, I'm absolutely with you too. Every time I see him as Thunderbolt Ross in those commercials, all I see is Paul from Shrinking. Because you're right. "You're not Steve Rogers" is exactly something that Paul would say. All right. Next up. Nicholas Oliver writes, if Spider-Verse 3 ends up being awful, do you think Sony takes back Spider-Man from Marvel, or they give up and sell all the Spider-Man rights to Marvel? Neither. Why would you do that? Why? Because one out of the 3 Spider-Verse movies aren't good? So let's assume for a second, and there's no reason to assume this, but let's assume for a second that Into the Spider-Verse 3, Beyond the Spider-Verse is bad. Okay. Why would Sony take back Spider-Man from Marvel? They're making a lot of money with that arrangement. And then number 2, why would they sell the rights to Spider-Man back to Marvel? They're making a lot of money with that arrangement. They're making a shit ton of money with that arrangement. So, first of all, I don't think there's any reason to believe Beyond the Spider-Verse isn't going to be great. But even if it isn't, there's no logical reason why Sony would A, want to take back the full rights of Spider-Man from Marvel, or B, sell their rights to Spider-Man back to Marvel. There's just no motivation or incentive to do that. Their partnership with Marvel is making them money hand over fist. And they don't even have to do a lot. That's the best thing if you're Sony. You don't even have to produce the movies. You make Marvel produce them, and then Marvel's got to give you the movie, and then you get to go and distribute it. So yeah, there's absolutely no reason in the world for them to get out of their arrangement with Marvel, either by taking it back or giving it back. There's just really no reason for them to do it. All right. Next up, Jerome writes, do you think Jamie meant to put the hit on John? That's a really good question. You know what? No, I don't. That's why I kind of find Jamie to be one of the most tragic characters in television. I think he loved his dad. He was always angry at him. And let's face it, he's also been screwed over a bunch. I still think, and this might be an unpopular opinion, but when you look at the whole rivalry between him and Beth, I feel for Jamie. Like, Beth has carried around this demonic hatred against Jamie their whole lives because as a kid, Jamie thought he was doing the right thing. He didn't want to take his sister to the abortion clinic in the first place. She talked him into it. And then when he was there, he was put in this ridiculous situation that a kid had to make a decision about, and he made the wrong decision. But he never wanted, he was just trying to help his sister. And as a result, Beth hated him for the rest of his life. Then he finds out his dad lied to him his whole life and all that kind of stuff. Again, I'm not saying any of that would justify putting out a hit on your dad, but no, I don't believe that he actually intended to have a hit put out on his dad. I don't believe he intended it. Now, that's not to say that there shouldn't have been some accountability. I just think in all of Yellowstone, Jamie often got the short end of the stick, man. And there were really times I really felt for him, even when he did stupid stuff. All right. Next up, we got Gone with the Cheddar, who writes, start with an X-Men film with OG 60s characters. Do standalone for Wolverine, Storm, Nightcrawler. I don't know if Nightcrawler would go over. I love Nightcrawler, but I don't know if they'd go over. And Colossus that leads to a giant-size X-Men movie. I don't think anybody... Here's the problem with Colossus. He's already seen as a very small B character because of the Deadpool films. That may not be fair, because I love Colossus in the Deadpool films. But Colossus, the general movie-going audience already looks at Colossus now as a small secondary side character. So I don't think you could do a standalone one. He could play a bigger role, but I don't think you can do a standalone one. I also don't think you could do a standalone Nightcrawler movie. I love Kurt. I love Kurt Wagner. I love that character. I don't know that you could do a standalone movie with him, though, that the audience would go to. Storm, yes. Wolverine, yes. Not sure about the other ones. But I agree in principle with you, though, Gon. I think you start with an X-Men movie, and then you do the spin-off characters, standalones after that. At least that's how I see it, at any rate. All right. Next up. Deadshot writes, Sinners looks great, but the trailer spoiled a bit. See, we talked about that a little bit on the show this morning. For those of you who don't know, the new Ryan Coogler, Michael B. Jordan movie Sinners put out their new trailer today, and it looks so good. It looks so good. But it also revealed a couple of things, right? It reveals that Hallie Steinfeld's character gets turned and becomes a vampire. But I would say what I say with all the time. Trailers that show something that happens in like the first act of the film, that's just like the setup part of the movie. To me, that's not a spoiler or a reveal. I really don't think it is. Now, if we go to see the movie, and I said this morning, if we go to see Sinners and like the first two acts of the movie is Michael B. Jordan and his friends trying to save Hallie Steinfeld from getting bitten by one of the vampires. And then in the third act of the film, the vampires get her and turn her. Well, then that's a pretty major third act thing they just revealed in the trailer. I have a feeling 8 times out of 10, it turns out that when stuff like that is in a trailer, it's actually not from a pivotal point of the movie. It's from one of the setup points. And so I really won't consider that any kind of a big reveal at all, depending on when it happens in the movie. But I have a feeling that stuff is all going to be very, very early. I might be wrong about that. I could totally be wrong about that. But I have a feeling a lot of that's going to be happening very, very early in the movie. All right. Next up. Dan Irwin writes, has there been any update on the God of War TV series? Kratos is one of my favorite characters, and his relationship with his son Loki, also known as Boy, his character development is fascinating. I'm right there with you on that. I think this will make a fantastic TV series, and after watching what Amazon did with Fallout, getting it nominated for Best Show of the Year, Fallout was amazing. And after seeing what Amazon did with Fallout, I cannot wait. The best update, though, for God of War came about a month ago. Was it a month or 2 months ago? Anyway, a short time ago. The best update in the world happened. We found out, they announced who the showrunner, the guy who's going to run the God of War series, Ronald D. Moore. The best showrunner in the business. Ronald D. Moore, who was the creator and showrunner of the greatest television series of all time, Battlestar Galactica. Then he followed it up to make one of Rob's favorite shows, For All Mankind. And now he's doing God of War. I mean, that is like the single best piece of news that possibly could have come out about that. Now, it's been very quiet since, which tells me they've got their writers' rooms going now. They got their writers' rooms going. They're crafting the stories. They're getting the whole thing together. I'm going to guess, I'm just spitballing here. I'm thinking sometime after the summer, maybe sometime in the fall, we'll get some concrete news about maybe some casting, about them getting ready to go into production. But I still think we're a number of months away from that. You never know. We could get an announcement tomorrow, but I'm going to guess sometime in the early fall, sometime after Comic-Con, or maybe at Comic-Con, we'll get a big announcement. We'll see. All right. Let's see. Is that it? Did I get through all of them? Let me do a quick refresh here to see if I got through all of them or not. I may not have. Nope, not yet. I still got a couple to get to here. How far down do I got to go? Okay. Where are we at? Okay. Next up, DUI Champ writes, John, you've repeatedly mentioned that Ben Affleck being cheated on an Oscar in 2012 because the movie won Best Picture. May I remind you, he was up against Spielberg and Lincoln. Lincoln was a far better film. I don't know if that I agree it was a far better film, but no, I'm not saying, I've never argued that Ben Affleck got cheated out of winning Best Director because there was stiff competition. Ben Affleck didn't even get nominated when he won Best Director of the Year at the Directors Guild of America at the DGA Awards, the ones given out by directors. So he won Best Director of the Year at the DGAs. He won Best Director of the Year at the Critics' Choice. He won Best Director of the Year at the Golden Globes. His movie, Argo, won Best Picture at the Academy Awards, and yet he didn't even get nominated for Best Director at the Oscars. It's not that he didn't win, although you could make an argument that maybe he could have won too. It's not that he didn't win. It's that he didn't get nominated. After winning every other major award that year, he didn't even get nominated at the Oscars. That's the one. That's the thing. It's not that he didn't win because there was stiff competition. It's just that he didn't even get nominated. And that's always been the problem, DUI Champ. That's always been the problem. All right. Next up. Kevin Frazier writes, good point regarding Deadpool and Wolverine. I didn't take that into account. They were established. I mean, yeah, but I mean, that doesn't, I don't want to take away though or discourage you from trying to think creatively and out of the box. We as fans should be thinking about creative ways that maybe they could do things and stuff like that. Again, you pitch an idea. I'll tell you why I like it or I don't, but don't take that as me trying to discourage you from thinking outside the box like that. But yes, that was one of the big main problems, that trying to come out and start something with characters that the audience had never met and doing again, like a Jubilee and a Toad team up movie is very, very different from doing a Deadpool and Wolverine one, right? So that's just the only point I was making. Anyway, thanks for the follow up, Kevin. I appreciate that, man. All right. Let's see. Jerome writes, I theorize that Black Panther 3 will have Shuri realizing that she shouldn't have taken the herb and she will get training to be a better warrior. Maybe. I remember a report came out, I believe it was Jeff Schneider who put out the report that they're actively looking to recast T'Challa, which is what they should have done in the first place. And really that was the heart of the problem. After Chadwick Boseman tragically died, they absolutely should have recast T'Challa to carry on Chadwick Boseman's work. That's how you honor the guy, is by carrying on his legacy, by carrying on his work. The character is not the actor, and the actor is not the character. And Chadwick Boseman did a remarkable job breathing life into this incredibly culturally important character. The way to honor Chadwick Boseman was not to kill off the character too. They should have recast. Now, I say this every single time and I'll continue to say it. You can't be mad at Ryan Coogler or Kevin Feige for doing it the way they did it, because it came out of a place of love. It came out of a place of wanting to honor Chadwick. And again, I think they erred. I think they made a mistake, but their motivation was in the right place. And I respect that. It still was a mistake. So from what we're hearing now inside is that they're going to correct that mistake and use the magic of comic book movies that, no character's ever really dead. They're going to bring him back probably and recast T'Challa. And hopefully that's what they do. But I mean, it's not uncommon, Jerome, for any comic book movie to join a character in a sequel or something like that, where they realize they got to train more, right? That's happened in a lot of comic books, and I could see them doing that with Shuri as they move forward. At least I would like them to. Let's see. Next up, Deadshot writes, if they wanted to show Michael B. Jordan as a vampire in the trailer, they should have kept the twin thing a twist. Maybe it has a twist, but who knows? But here's the problem, Deadshot. You're making an assumption. You're making an assumption that in the movie, the twin getting bit is some kind of twist. And my suggestion to you is don't have that assumption. Assume this is something that is probably going to happen sometime near the end of the first act of the film. That's really a setup for it. And the story really becomes brother versus vampire brother. And that's the story. And so I would just say, be careful not to make it, because you're assuming that some point in the movie that becomes some big surprise twist. And maybe it was never intended as such. I'm not saying that definitively because I haven't seen the movie, but I'm saying that's probably not, it's not good to make those assumptions and then make judgments based on an assumption that you don't even know if it's true or not, right? So, yeah, we'll see. We'll see how it all works out and what their plan is for it. All right. Next up, we got Zeki, who writes, "Hey, John, I think Wolverine should be in the X-Men movie, but in a minimal role. Then Wolverine should have a solo film, which should be rated R, and then be a full member of the X-Men." It depends on the story they're going to do, because their story might not make any sense for what their story is going to be. So we'll see what their plan is. Here's the position, though, that Marvel finds themselves in. Without any doubt, and it's not even close, the most popular X-Men character on the globe is Wolverine, and it's not even close. Second place isn't even in sight. Now, yes, in the 5% bubble that we live in, we can mention some other great X-Men characters, absolutely say, this character is just as good as what we can do that, yes. But what there's no debating is that amongst the global population, Wolverine is by far and away the most popular character you have. Like by miles. And he has been for a long time. So it's going to be tricky. It's going to be tricky to launch, especially coming out of Deadpool and Wolverine, which has only made the Wolverine character even more beloved and popular. It's going to be tricky to come out with X-Men without a prominent Wolverine. Not that the whole X-Men branch of the cinematic universe has to be completely Wolverine-centric. Not at all. There are many main roles. I'm just saying it's going to be very tricky for them to do it without Wolverine being one of the main roles. Not like the center of the universe, but one of the main roles. It's going to be really tricky. And maybe they find a way to do it. Maybe they find a way to do it. I hope that they do, but it's going to be a tricky thing because the popularity of that character is a bit of a double-edged sword, isn't it? All right. And our final question this evening comes to us from SC, who writes, "How many movies do you think James Gunn will direct for the DCU?" Well, I mean, you need to put more parameters on that. How many movies do I think he'll direct in the first 5 years? How many movies do I think he'll direct in the first 10 years? Let me put it this way. I could see James Gunn directing a DCU movie every 3 to 4 years. Because he first and foremost has to be the CEO of DC. That is not a part-time job. That is a full-time job. And we've already seen the fact that he's taking up so much of his time to direct a Superman movie is having a bit of an impact, right? Like there's been these public inconsistencies between the director of Batman Brave and the Bold and James Gunn already. Like the director of Batman Brave and the Bold is coming out saying, my Batman movie's been delayed. And then James Gunn's like publicly saying, no, it hasn't been delayed. And then the director of Batman Brave and the Bold is saying one thing. And that's the stuff that's going to happen when you're the CEO and the head of the company and you're not using your time to be the CEO and the head of the company. So I do think you're going to see him continue to direct movies, but I think it'll be at a rate of one every 3 to 4 years. And I think that's okay. Then that's why he's got Peter Safran as his partner to pick up on the business end of things. James Gunn needs to look after the creative end of things. So I would say over the course of 10 years, maybe he can get in 3 movies, maybe 3 movies in the course of 10 years. And then if he, but I'm not going to just say 3, because if he's the CEO of DC for 20 years, then that number becomes 6, right? So I'm going to say every 3 to 4 years, or maybe like 3 every 10 years. That's where I'll go with that. That'll be my guess. And all right, that's perfect timing. That's an hour and a half, guys. And guys, that'll do it for tonight's installment of Open Mic. Thank you guys so much for being here and hanging out with me this evening as we talk about some of our favorite things. A big special thank you to all you guys who sent in the questions. Number one, because you gave us great fun things to talk about. But number two, you supported our channel as you did it. And all of us involved with the show, thank you guys so much for your support. Hey guys, don't forget to join us again tomorrow. I'll be joined on the John Campea Show. I'll be joined once again by Jonathan Voico, Robert Meyer Burnett, and Chris Carr. We hope you guys will come by and join us as well. So guys, that'll do it for me for now. My name's John Campea, and until next time, my friends, bye-bye.